Hey, what's going on, everybody? We have Chapter 18 of America's History for you today. This one is on the 8th edition, but as always, if you're using other editions, they'll match up. Please take a moment and make sure you check out all my other videos in the description that match up with this chapter, including videos for the new curriculum. All right, let's start off talking about commerce and culture. Now, during this time, businesses sought to attract middle-class women. They realized that they were a huge consumer base. You see things like P.T. Barnum's Circus begin to appeal to families, and they put on shows, and that is still around today. If you've ever been to a circus, chances are it probably was P.T. Barnum's Circus, and there is Mr. Barnum. Also, we see department stores in the beginning of store credit, where you could buy something without having to have cash, and you can essentially take out a loan from the store. Electricity helped pave the way for new appliances, including washing machines, vacuum cleaners, etc., which made life easier around the home. And you see the emergence of Pullman Palace cars. And Pullman Palace cars were cars on trains that were very, very high end. They were very classy. You could look at it here. It was very comfortable. It was almost like a living room on a train. So it was a way to travel in lots of style. So they were luxurious train cars. Okay, let's talk about Plessy versus Ferguson. This is a picture of Homer Plessy, and he was riding on a train car in New Orleans in the white section, and he is biracial, and he was ordered to leave the white section of the train car. He did not, and he sued, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld segregation or upheld Jim Crow laws as long as they were equal. So this established a precedent of separate but equal, separate facilities for whites and blacks as long as they were equal. And again, it upheld the constitutionality of Jim Crow laws. However, we will see that the South really focuses on the word separate and not equal. None of the facilities are equal. And here's a sign from the 1950s, I believe this is, in which segregation was still around in the South. This is later overturned via the court case Brown versus the Board of Education. Please absolutely know that is specifically mentioned in the new AP curriculum. So there's a couple things you need to know. One, Plessy versus Ferguson upheld the constitutionality of Jim Crow laws, allowed for segregation, and know that phrase separate but equal. And then also know that it was overturned later in 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education. Okay, let's talk about the rise of sports here. You see many sports that we know today begin to develop during this time, and we see the emergence of muscular Christianity. And this is really put forth by the YMCA, and this appealed to both professionals and working class men, so a large portion of the population. This promoted Christianity and fitness. The C in the YMCA is Christianity. Baseball had been around for a little while, but it really became popular in the 1870s after the Civil War was over, and it provided Americans with new leisure activity, whether they were playing or watching. And this will be especially true in the 1920s when it becomes very, very, very popular. Do you know what the first professional baseball team? Take a minute and think about it. You may know. Oh, yeah, it's the Cincinnati Red Stockings, which is the current Cincinnati Reds, formed in 1869. It is the oldest professional baseball franchise there is. So really, if you're a baseball fan, you owe it to Cincinnati for professional baseball. So here is the team from 1869. Look at the facial hair of these guys. Oh my God. If you can't tell that that's from the 1870s, I don't know what picture you can tell that from. Okay, let's continue with this. We have the rise of the Negro Leagues. Now, sadly, because of segregation, we have the emergence of a baseball league that is entirely black. They were excluded from baseball, and the Negro Leagues were established, and African Americans played in them for many, many decades. We also have American football, which became popular, especially on the collegiate level, under Yale's Walter Camp, who utilized scientific management. Quick, from last chapter, who created scientific management and what did it call for? Think about, don't look in your notes. Don't you dare look in your notes. You know this. Yes, absolutely, Frederick Taylor, and it was a focus on everybody doing a specific task. So we see in sports, they are applying ideas from the business world or Taylorism or scientific management. Nice job on getting that right. Okay, the great outdoors. Definitely know this stuff is mentioned in the new curriculum. We have the Sierra Club, which sought to preserve America's mountains. And in 1872, we have the creation of Yellowstone in Wyoming. And here's a picture from the early 1900s of Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir at Yellowstone National Park, and they're standing up about 3,000 feet. My heart is racing just looking at it. In 1916, we have the creation of the National Park Service, and in 1906, we have the Antiquities Act, which allowed the president to set aside objects as national monuments, which gave them protection. Now, business interests hoped lands would be declared monuments as opposed to parks because there was weaker protection. Now, keep in mind, businesses, and this is from Key Concept 6.1, Roman numeral 3, letter A, government agencies and conservationist organizations contended with corporate interests about the extension of public control over natural resources, including land and water. So there is a conflict between businesses and government over natural resources in the wild. Many states will pass laws regulating hunting and fishing to preserve wildlife as well. Okay, let's focus on women here. And Key Concept 6.3, Roman numeral 2, letter C states, challenging their perspective place, women and African American activists articulated alternative visions of political, social, and economic equality. So we have changes in family life. Childbearing decreased drastically during this time. Prior to the Civil War, it would not be uncommon for women to have, 12 children, and that decreased. People are also marrying later in life, and contraceptives or birth control became more widespread. The Comstock Act of 1873 prohibited distribution of information about sex and birth control. When it comes to education, by 1900, over 70% of Americans between 5 and 18 attended school. That's pretty darn high for that time. And we have the establishment of the Tuskegee Institute, founded by this gentleman, Booker T. Washington, a former slave. And I do have a video on Booker T. compared to another African-American leader, W.E.B. Du Bois. So be sure to check that out, because this is the idea that African-Americans and women are beginning to change their roles, or attempting to change their roles in society. So that he advocated that blacks learn industrial education, or something called vocational training, that blacks should learn a specific skill. He gave a speech at Atlanta, which is known as the Atlanta Compromise, and he argued for economic opportunities for blacks. And he says, in all things that are purely social, we could be as separate as the fingers, yet one in the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress. This is a very important speech, very powerful. This is a very important speech in history, and I think this would be a great example of an excerpt that multiple choice questions should be based on. So definitely be aware of this. So let's focus on women's education opportunities. They increased post-Civil War, and many women attended black colleges that were created during Reconstruction. Okay, continuing with this same concept, we see that this idea of maternalism, and this helped justify women's involvement in reform efforts. This idea that they were very motherly and could fix things. The Women's Christian Temperance Union was established in 1874 by Frances Willard, and here is Frances, and this sought to challenge alcohol and domestic violence. This was a key frontrunner in the prohibition movement of the 1900s, and this movement was divided along religious, ethnic, and class lines, especially ethnic lines, in which immigrants that would come to America, alcohol would be more a part of their country's history or their cultural history than it is in America. Women, race, and patriotism. We're going to talk about the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They created monuments and gave out Confederate flags, and they helped reshape the image of the Civil War. And this is kind of that idea of the lost cause, that the Civil War, that many of the fighters like Robert E. Lee were these really great high character people, and it's a way of almost rewriting the Civil War. The National Association of Colored Women was established, and this was a reform organization that focused on orphans, elderly in need of homes, and advocated temperance as well. Post-Civil War, temperance is going to be a huge reform movement. Ida B. Wells, absolutely positively know her. She was a journalist that wrote about the horrors of lynching, especially in the South, of mobs attacking and brutally murdering African Americans. And she demonstrated that lynchings were often the result of labor and economic disputes, and relationships between black men and white women. That's up 6.2, Roman numeral 1, letter D. It states, in an urban atmosphere where the access to power was unequally distributed, political machines provided social services in exchange for political support. Settlement houses helped immigrants adapt to the new language and customs, and women's clubs and self-help groups targeted intellectual development and social and political reform. That's a breather. That's a lot there, huh? All right, so let's talk about from domesticity to women's rights. Again, we have the National American Women's Suffrage Association, also known as the NAWSA. What do you think they wanted? Look at the keywords in there, figure it out. Yeah, you identified suffrage. That means they wanted the ability for women to vote. And many Western states provided suffrage for women earlier than Eastern states. And you have Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, and Utah were among the first states to allow women's suffrage. By 1913, many women west of the Mississippi River were granted suffrage. And in 1920, with the 19th Amendment, we'll see everybody is granted, but that's for a future chapter. Feminism, if you were a feminist during this time, you would advocate political, economic, and social equality for women. A lot of times people see feminism as a radical thing, but really they're in favor of equality for women. Okay, science and faith, we have Darwinism and its critics. So focusing on Charles Darwin really quick, and I'm not a science person whatsoever, but he basically introduced this theory of evolution. Well, Herbert Spencer comes along and he kind of takes Darwin's ideas and applies them to humans. And he is the one that coins this term social Darwinism. That is not Charles Darwin who comes up with this. And this essentially means survival of the fittest. If you're strong, you deserve to survive. If you're weak, you deserve not to survive. And Herbert Spencer and his followers are going to apply this, and there he is, are going to apply this to businesses. And let's just take a moment and admire those mutton chops on him. I don't even know if they connect at the bottom. It's hard to see if that's a beard or just two really long sideburns. Why is there no facial hair on his chin? Can you explain that to me? So key concept 6.3, Roman numeral 1, letter C says business leaders consolidated corporations into trusts and holding companies and defended their resulting status and privilege through theories such as social Darwinism. Now in the last chapter we talked about trusts and holding companies. Now we're going to focus on the social Darwinism. It's important to know this was used by the wealthy to justify their wealth. Hey, I'm strong, therefore I'm allowed to survive. Or I am strong and I was chosen to be strong. That would be used quite frequently. Success and wealth showed that wealthy were naturally selected. A lot of times they would compare this to religion and say, hey, God wanted me to be strong. That's why I am so wealthy. Eugenics is something that becomes popular during this time and is around for the early part of the 20th century. It is the practice of preventing certain individuals from reproducing, whether they're criminals, those that are mentally insane or mentally retarded, but this did happen quite a bit. Okay, let's talk about realism in the arts. Realism is representing life in realistic terms, so as good or bad as it may be. Mark Twain, also known as Samuel Clemens, he is the one that coined the term the Gilded Age, and he was anti-imperialistic. We'll come back to him when we talk about the Spanish-American War, and he was a critic of American progress. And many realism and modernism artists were men. Okay, key concept 6.2, Roman numeral 1, letter C. Immigrants sought to both Americanize and to maintain their unique identities, along with others, such as some African Americans and men. They were able to take advantage of new career opportunities, even in the face of widespread social prejudices. So Catholic and Jewish immigrants struggled to keep their traditions versus becoming American. Italians and Poles often established their own parishes and schools, their own churches as a way of keeping their customs and traditions. And key concept 6.3, Roman numeral 1, letter B, increasingly prominent racist and nativist theories, along with the Supreme Court decisions such as Plessy versus Ferguson, which we already talked about, were used to justify violence as well as local and national policies of discrimination and segregation. So the American Protective Association, also known as the APA, emerges at this time, and they were very similar to the Know Nothing Party of the 1840s and 1850s. Take a second, think about what did the Know Nothing Party want? What were they against? So if you know that, then you automatically know what the APA is all about. And yes, they sought to ban Catholics from holding office. They were anti-immigrant, they were a nativist group, and they wanted to keep Catholics from holding office. Now, JFK weren't alive at this time, but if he was, he'd probably be like, APA, why are you hating on Catholics, bros? Get it? Because he was the first Catholic president. Okay, key concept 6.3, Roman numeral 2, letter B. A number of critics challenged the dominant corporate ethic in the United States and sometimes capitalism itself, offering alternative visions of the society through utopianism and the social gospel. Social gospel is mentioned. We're going to focus on that. So it is a Protestant church movement that sought to improve society by helping to end injustice and improve social welfare. So this is a religious movement that sought or advocated the improvement of American society. They would establish reading rooms, nurseries, and other services that were provided for the needy. The Salvation Army develops, and this established soup kitchens and shelters, still around today. I'm sure there's one near where you are living. They are everywhere. And fundamentalism focused on the strict literal interpretation of the Bible. This will cause a conflict in the 1920s between science and fundamentalism. And we will get to that. I keep giving you all these sneak peeks of the 1920s, but we will get to it. And this would play an important role in the 1920s, as I just mentioned. All right, let's do a quick recap of Chapter 18. Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but equal. Absolutely know that. No, also that was later overturned by Brown versus Board. The conflict between business and government over land and resources. Booker T. Washington, know who he is. What was the name of his school? Do you remember it? Yeah, Tuskegee, you got it. Women's Christian Temperance Union, what was their goal? Temperance, what does that mean? Getting rid of alcohol. Ida B. Wells was against lynching, definitely know that. Social Darwinism was used to justify wealth for the wealthy. And the American Protective Association, or the APA, was anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, and very similar to the Know Nothing Party. And the social gospel was a church movement, Protestant church movement, to improve society. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in this section below. I look forward to seeing you right back here for Chapter 19. And just sit and admire that Reds picture for a minute before you leave. Best of luck on any and all of your tests, especially the one in May. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.